Hello everyone, this is David, and tonight's movie that we watched is Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. Now this is an interesting entry into the Millennium series, in that it is the first one to have a direct sequel, that in Tokyo SOS, and it does the same thing all the other Millennium do, with the exception of its sequel, and that is eliminate all canon up to this point, and kind of inserts its own canon in, which is an interesting way of doing it, but it has it's pros and cons. It kind of balances itself out. Like, I'd like there to be a built-up canon over the years. Like, I liked the Heisei era for that. Like, you had this built-up canon and the humans trying to catch up with fighting Godzilla and this whole shenanigans. But now it's like every movie's its own universe, so a little different. I don't really the Millenniums to me are good Godzilla movies, but they're not. Most of them aren't really my favorites. They're just okay, middle of the road, if you will. And that's by no means mean they're bad. It's just they don't really stand out as much as a lot of the ones in the Heisei era, with the exception of All Monsters Attack, which is the last one we reviewed, and Final Wars, which is one of my favorite Godzilla movies. And when we get to that, we'll get to that. But anyway, let's talk about this movie a little bit. So, Godzilla's back, and he's back to looking kind of like the Millennium version of Godzilla, although I think he's a little trimmed down. I'm not exactly sure, but he looks a little bit better than his inaugural Millennial thing, but he's back to that. He's no longer the dead-eyed Godzilla. And Mechagodzilla, in its fourth installment, this time it's kind of different. So this time they built Mechagodzilla around the bones of the first Godzilla, so that's pretty interesting. And that has an issue, but we'll get into that when we get to the movie. In addition, Mechagodzilla has most of his normal weapons, plus he has the absolute zero cannon, which is basically what it sounds like. It basically is a cannon that freezes everything in its path. It's like the big Mega Buster cannon. It drains like most of his energy to use it. It's one of those kind of things. It's very common in anime or space operas to have like a main gun that like utilizes most of the ship's energy. It's basically that. And like most of those, it never really hits anything. It's kind of sad. Alright, let's get to the movie. So it starts off in 1999, 45 years after Godzilla's first attack. They talk about all the different monsters that have attacked throughout the years. There's Godzilla. They talk about Mothra. They talk about the War of the Gargantuous in Gyrus attacking. And in the sequel, we'll find out that the movie Space Amoeba is in canon as well. Not in this one, though. And it deals with this woman, Akane Yushiro, who is a lieutenant in the army. She's fighting Godzilla for the first time, and she can't manage to bring herself to kill it. She gets scapegoated by the military, basically gets sent to have a desk job. In the meantime, they find out that Godzilla himself is immune to maser fire, thus the Japanese Defense Force not very effective, so they have to rethink their strategy. So what they do is they build this new Mechagodzilla, which they call Kiryu, and he's built around the bones of the previous Godzilla, the 1954 Godzilla. So that's an interesting idea. I don't know why they decided to build around bones, but I guess it was the only thing strong enough. I don't know, but they do that. And in the meantime, they're building up. They build up Mechagodzilla. They showcase him to the world. They show what he can do. His absolute cannon, or absolute zero cannon, destroys buildings. It just like shatters them. He's carried into places by these jets that are modified specifically to carry him. He can be recharged by microwaves being channeled into him, so on and so forth. You know, that kind of thing. And Godzilla shows up, and they launch Kiryu and the squadron to go fight him. In the middle of that fight, Godzilla's fighting him. Godzilla roars. That apparently awakens Kiryu back to consciousness, and the soul of the original Godzilla. So now the spirit of the original Godzilla is possessing Kiryu. A little interesting, a little different. And then Godzilla retreats to the ocean, but Kiryu goes on a rampage throughout the city, destroys a bunch of stuff. So needless to say, that that kind of didn't help the Japanese Defense Force. They're like, what the hell happened? So they spend a good while trying to figure out what happened with Kiryu and why he went nuts, and they find out that when Godzilla roared, like, basically his soul, like, came back out, and they figure out how to fix that so so it won't be an issue later. Next up, they get into a fight. Well, Godzilla shows up. He starts doing a rampage again, and they want to launch Kiryu again, but a bunch of people are like, but what if he goes on a rampage? And they're like, well, we got to, because it's the only thing that can stop him. So they send out, Kiryu to fight Godzilla, and it's a pretty good fight back and forth. Although Godzilla gets his licks in, Kiryu tries to use the Absolute Zero cannon to finish off Godzilla. Godzilla like knocks it away. Or doesn't knock it away, but like he blasts it with his atomic breath, causing Mechagodzilla to short out. Akane gets into Mechagodzilla to manually pilot, because it was remote controlled before that. And she stands back up, fires the cannon again. Well, actually, her friend pilots into Godzilla's mouth so he can't breathe atomic fire. Don't know why he doesn't just take the jet out of his mouth, but sure. Is going to fire the Absolute Zero cannon, but doesn't. Charges Godzilla instead, and just starts wailing on him. Akane's friend gets knocked out of Godzilla's mouth. She grabs him, brings him to the ocean, fires the cannon under the ocean. The entire place freezes up. There's that pause where everyone's like, "Oh my God, is she dead? Is Godzilla dead? Is it all over?" And then the ice shatters, and Godzilla emerges. And he's got like a gaping hole in his chest. He looks all fucked up. And he just like looks at the city and then turns to walk away. In the meantime, Kiryu resurfaces, missing an arm, and its Absolute Zero cannon looks severely damaged. And Akane comes out, and she kind of stands on the edge of on the side of the Mechagodzilla, or Kiryu, and watches as Godzilla walks into the distance. And that's kind of where Godzilla goes off. He goes back to the ocean like he does in so many films. And meanwhile, it cuts back to in the center, and they're fixing up Kiryu. They're trying to make him ready for when Godzilla attacks again, because you're pretty sure he will. In a post-credit scene, Akane meets up with Tokumitsu and Sarah, who are two other characters that Tokumitsu was one of the people that was working on Kiryu, and Sarah's his daughter. And they've been going back and forth, having a bit of a on-again, off-again kind of relationship. Not really a relationship, but like he's trying to get her to go out to dinner with him, and she won't do it because, she's too busy fighting Godzilla, which is, a fair reason. All things said and done, it's a fair reason. I can't date you right now. I'm fighting Godzilla. But yeah, and then she agrees to go out to dinner with him, or she agrees to take him out to dinner because they had a bet going that if she won, he would take her out to dinner, but if she lost, she would take him out. And so she technically calls it a draw. So she's like, well, I'll take you out to dinner. So then him and his daughter high five, and it kind of freeze frames on her as she walks past or walks away from Kiryu, leading into the future with what could be next. And that's Godzilla. Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. It's an okay movie. It didn't really catch me too strongly. The problem I had is I couldn't find a version of this that wasn't subbed, and I don't really like subs. It doesn't put me into the movie nearly as much, so I did my best with it I could. But I don't like to read a movie. I like to listen to a movie and watch what's going on. My brain doesn't like to process two things at once, so I miss a lot of the action when I'm reading the subs, or I miss the subs when I'm watching the action. So I'm sorry if this is a little shorter than usual, but there's the snafu that came up there. Thankfully, I believe Tokyo SOS I can find in an English version somewhere. I think I saw it on Comcast or something. Maybe not. But I'll figure that out. But that's it for another day. In the meantime, this one's an okay entry, but it really doesn't feel like it stands up too well on its own. We'll see how it stands up with Tokyo SOS coming up next as direct sequel. And if you watch those both in tandem, we'll see how good that is. It may be good. It may be terrible. I don't know. I'll give this one a definite middle of the road. Nothing really stood out. I mean, Mechagodzilla is usually pretty good when he shows up, but this time it's very Mechagodzilla's capabilities were limited. Like, he needed to be air trucked in. He had a power supply that could run out. You know, he had issues. I mean, it definitely wasn't his strongest entry into the canon in terms of Mechagodzilla's, but he was still a pretty good foe, and he fought Godzilla to a standstill, which is actually kind of, going back to the original Mechagodzilla. Mechagodzilla technically was defeated, but then came back in another movie that's a direct sequel. So we'll see how this goes. And next time, it's Godzilla Tokyo SOS. But for now, good night, folks.